It's Tennessee versus the NCAA. That's right. The NCAA investigating Tennessee over, we're not entirely sure what. Perhaps it has to do with NIL. Perhaps it has to do with football. But right now, we don't have the specific details. What we do know is that Tennessee is proactively fighting back, and that Tennessee Chancellor Donde Plowman basically went scorched earth on the NCAA this week with a letter to Charlie Baker, the NCAA president. And in this letter, Plowman essentially says, look, we're going to fight you on whatever you try to accuse us of. And this is very interesting because the NCAA just got through with a case with Tennessee where Tennessee was praised for its exemplary cooperation. Now, cooperating on the NCAA with the NCAA in that particular case allowed Tennessee to fire Jeremy Pruitt for free. So there was an incentive. But in this case, it's a little bit different. But this seems to be part of a wave of NCAA investigations related to NIL that you're seeing across the country. You just saw the resolution of one at Florida State where offensive coordinator Alex Atkins got suspended for 3 games. They're investigating Florida right now about the contract that was signed with Jaden Rashada, the quarterback who signed with Florida but never wound up at Florida. But it was a $13.8 million contract that had no real money behind it, but taken by the terms of the contract would constitute a violation of NCAA rules if that's what they determine. What happened at Tennessee, we don't exactly know yet, but we know that Donde Plowman is mad. From her letter earlier today, this is on January 29th, a team from the University of Tennessee met with members of your enforcement staff to discuss allegations the NCAA intends to bring against Tennessee related to NIL. We appreciate your staff listening to our arguments and agreeing to evaluate them. The NCAA's allegations are factually untrue and procedurally flawed. Moreover, it is intellectually dishonest of the NCAA enforcement staff to pursue infraction cases as if student athletes have no NIL rights and as if institutions have all been functioning post-Alston, which is the Supreme Court case the NCAA lost, with a clear and unchanging set of rules and willfully violating them. It would have been my preference to discuss my concerns with you in person. Your recent testimony before Congress indicated you wanted to meet with as many member institutions and student athletes as possible to discuss issues associated with college sports. I am sharing my perspective in writing since my December request for you to meet with me and our athletics director, Danny White, was denied. That is Donde Plowman saying, hey, we were going to talk to you about this stuff. You didn't want to talk to us about it. And this is the biggest problem for the NCAA right now. As it goes after these NIL cases, the schools do not feel like they were given a real opportunity to shape the rules here. This has all happened kind of influx since NIL was allowed, basically because state legislatures legislated it into existence. And so the NCAA has been trying to play catch up ever since. And it really has become a big problem when they try to enforce these cases. We haven't seen much enforcement. We saw the Florida State one with Alex Atkins. We saw a women's basketball one at the University of Miami last year. That's pretty much it. But they seem to be going after quite a few schools, and I don't know that those schools are going to take it. I think we've seen a big shift in the way schools deal with the NCAA in the last few years. It started with North Carolina. You had those paper classes, and that one was a little bit different because North Carolina wanted to make sure they didn't get in big trouble. They had, these classes covered multiple sports, athletes from multiple sports took them, but where the NCAA enforcement staff screwed up is they said they were extra benefits when in fact they were available to everyone on campus. So North Carolina's lawyers outmaneuvered the NCAA enforcement staff on that one. That was not necessarily them just thumbing their nose at the NCAA. That was fighting back with a legitimate legal challenge. Michigan fought back a little bit harder and a little bit differently with the NCAA and with the Big Ten in the Burgergate situation and in the Connor Stallion sign stealing situation. And remember, Michigan was always one of those places that you just assumed, well, they're going to do what the NCAA says. They don't want to be viewed as a renegade program. That's all out the window now. None of that stuff matters anymore because the schools feel like they've been pushed into this corner. And Plowman put it really well. Basically, the NCAA is trying to enforce rules that cannot coexist with the NIL laws that exist in the states. Here's another piece of what Donde Plowman said. No one wants the chaos that currently exists, but here's where we find ourselves. The NCAA and its members need to redefine their relationship and create creative proactive partnerships that actually help solve the problems facing intercollegiate athletics. Rather than partnering with institutions, including institutions like ours that the NCAA has cited for exemplary leadership, the NCAA enforcement staff appears to be trying to bully institutions back to a time before the Alston decision, which will inevitably lead to more lawsuits. So what she's saying is they're trying to turn back the clock to when schools could just unilaterally impose these rules on the athletes and they weren't going to get kicked back in court. What the Alston decision did, it wasn't about what they were arguing about necessarily before the court. That was money related to educational expenses. What that 9-0 loss for the NCAA did in the Supreme Court was basically said, all of your rules are probably going to be construed as collusion if they get brought before us. So you need to figure out how to make them conform to the Sherman Antitrust Act. And that's the problem, is the rules that the NCAA is trying to enforce probably don't conform to the Sherman Act. They don't conform to a lot of the state NIL laws. And that's why the next step, probably, whether Tennessee does this or it's some other school that gets accused by the NCAA that does this, the next step is the state attorneys general getting involved, the state attorney general or multiple state attorneys general getting involved. We saw that with the transfer case where there were multiple attorneys general from different states suing the NCAA. So this is bad for the NCAA. And I get it. I understand why the enforcement staff is trying to do this. They have to justify their existence and their paychecks somehow. Because if you follow the letter of a lot of the state NIL laws, there's no reason for them to exist. So their paychecks go poof. So they got to try something. But this isn't going to work, because what you're going to have is some of the more powerful schools fighting back. And if enough schools fight back, and if enough schools feel like they're being targeted, they're going to just go in and say, we're the members here. We're going to change the rules, and we might change the rules to make you go away. So they've got to be pretty careful here. One more thing from Donde Plowman. It is intellectually dishonest for the NCAA staff to issue guidelines that say a third-party collective or business may meet with prospective student-athletes, discuss NIL, even enter into a contract with prospective student-athletes, but at the same time say that the collective may not engage in conversations that would be of a recruiting nature. Any discussion about NIL might factor into a prospective student-athlete's decision to attend an institution. This creates an inherently unworkable situation, and everyone knows it. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is what I said, where these rules can't actually exist with the current state laws and the current environment. They cannot exist, because you can't say that you can't use NIL to attract an athlete to pick a particular school, because how else are you going to use it? How else is it going to work? These guys have value. We at On3, we have a whole ranking that determines how valuable they are to schools, not just our NIL value, but our recruiting rankings. There's clearly a market for it, and there's nothing the NCAA can do about that. They can wish it was 5 years ago again, but it's not going to happen. That's never coming back. And so what you saw from Tennessee, I think, is an opening salvo. If the NCAA is going to keep going after schools for NIL violations, it's just going to get attacked by the schools themselves. And by the way, the schools are their members. So this is where, if you piss off enough of them, again, they can turn around and legislate you out of existence. So you got to be pretty careful here if you're the NCAA. I think this Tennessee thing might just be the tip of the iceberg. Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.